I'm gonna kick your teeth down your throat, and I'm gonna beat you. I will open up the gates of hell, and I will unleash a fury that no mortal man has ever seen. At WrestleMania, your career is over.
For 16 years, no man had ever beaten him on the grandest stage of them all. The Streak was untouchable, a legend that grew bigger with every WrestleMania, every fallen opponent, every year that passed without an answer. That man was The Undertaker. Then came a man who called himself Mr. WrestleMania, a showman who built his entire career on stealing moments just like this one, Shawn Michaels. He didn't just step into the ring that night. He stepped into a story, one he himself had written as if it were his final chapter. What followed wasn't just a wrestling match. It was a war between two icons, fought with everything they had left to give. And when the lights came up, the wrestling world knew it had just witnessed something it would never forget. To understand why this match meant so much, you have to understand the two men standing in that ring. The Undertaker, real name Mark Calloway, debuted in WWE back in 1990 as a slow-moving, supernatural force nobody could quite explain. By 1991, he had already begun something nobody realized would become historic, a winning streak at WrestleMania that started against Jimmy Snuka and just kept growing, year after year, until it became the single most protected piece of mythology in wrestling history. Shawn Michaels came from a completely different world. Known as the Heartbreak Kid, he built his legacy not on intimidation, but on artistry, incredible athleticism, fearless bumps, and an uncanny ability to make every match feel like the most important one of the night. He had already authored some of the most iconic WrestleMania moments ever, from his ladder match classic with Razor Ramon to his Iron Man war with Bret Hart, earning the nickname Mr. WrestleMania long before this rivalry ever began. By 2009, both men were no longer in their primes. Undertaker was in his mid-40s, his body worn down by nearly 2 decades of brutal stunts and bigger, younger opponents. Michaels was approaching the back half of his career too, but still moved like a man who refused to slow down. Neither needed this match to prove anything to anyone, and yet both treated it like the most important night of their professional lives. The build started simply enough. Michaels fought his way through qualifying matches, defeating JBL and then Vladimir Kozlov just to earn the right to face Undertaker at WrestleMania. But the real tension came from the storytelling around it, a good versus evil narrative, with Michaels positioned as a man of faith trying to walk into the darkness, and Undertaker cast as something closer to a force from the underworld itself, daring anyone foolish enough to challenge him. What made the build chilling wasn't just the in-ring action leading up to it, it was the imagery. Michaels released a vignette that played almost like his own eulogy, suggesting he might be walking toward his own destruction by challenging the Streak. For a performer who had spent his whole career stealing the show, this felt different, heavier, more personal, like a man who had decided this match might define the rest of his life, win or lose. When April 5, 2009 finally arrived at Reliant Stadium in Houston, more than 70,000 fans packed the building for WrestleMania 25. The entrances alone set the tone for what was coming. Michaels descended from above on a platform, dressed in white, symbolizing light and purity. Undertaker rose up from beneath the stage with fire erupting around him, the embodiment of darkness answering the call. From the opening lockup, it was clear this wasn't going to be a typical big match formula. Undertaker set a deliberate, punishing pace early, trying to wear Michaels down with power and size. But Michaels, never one to be intimidated, used his speed and experience to slip out of trouble again and again, frustrating Undertaker and dragging the fight outside the ring whenever momentum started slipping away from him. Then came one of the most talked-about moments of the entire night. Undertaker attempted his signature suicide dive through the ropes, but Michaels pulled a nearby cameraman directly into his path. Undertaker crashed awkwardly, landing in a way that genuinely terrified people watching live, with several insiders later admitting it looked far more dangerous than anyone intended. Somehow he got back up and kept going. As the match progressed, both men began trading their biggest weapons. Undertaker hit his chokeslam. He hit his last ride. He even connected with a Tombstone piledriver, the move that had ended nearly every opponent before this night. And each time, Michaels somehow found a way to kick out, dragging the crowd into a frenzy that built louder with every near fall. Michaels had his own moments of magic too. He nailed Sweet Chin Music, his career-defining finisher, directly to Undertaker's jaw, not once but multiple times throughout the match. Each time the crowd rose to its feet, certain the impossible was finally happening. And each time Undertaker somehow stirred, sat up and kept fighting, refusing to let the streak die in that ring. The final stretch of the match became something close to legendary. Michaels climbed to the top rope for a moonsault, one of the riskiest moves in his arsenal, looking to finish the job once and for for all. Instead, Undertaker caught him in midair and drove him straight down with a second tombstone piledriver. This time, there was no kick-out. The referee's hand hit the mat 3 times, and the streak moved to 17-0. The reaction inside the building was deafening, but the reaction from the wrestling world afterward was even louder. Commentators, critics, and fellow performers all reached for the same word almost immediately: perfect. Wrestling journalists who had covered the business for decades called it the most psychologically compelling match they had ever witnessed, while Undertaker himself later said he and Michaels had delivered on every level of storytelling and execution that night. Shawn Michaels, never shy about praising his own work, called it the most beautiful thing he had ever performed inside a wrestling ring in his entire life. That wasn't ego talking. Even respected critics who rarely hand out perfect scores gave the match some of the highest ratings of the decade, with several outlets eventually ranking it as the single greatest match in WrestleMania history. But the story didn't end there. Michaels couldn't let it go. Later that year, when the match won Match of the Year honors, Michaels stood on stage and openly challenged Undertaker to a rematch, insisting he could still find a way to finish what he started. Undertaker initially refused, saying he had nothing left to prove. Michaels, frustrated and desperate, began attacking referees and officials, practically begging for another opportunity to prove his case. Eventually, Undertaker relented, but not without raising the stakes to a level neither man had ever faced before. If Michaels lost this time, his career would be over. No exceptions, no technicalities. Michaels accepted without hesitation, reasoning that if he couldn't beat The Undertaker at WrestleMania, there was no point in continuing to wrestle at all. It was an extraordinary gamble for a performer who still had plenty left to give physically. WrestleMania 26 arrived in 2010, and this time the match carried a different kind of weight. There was no mystery left to build. Both men knew exactly what they were capable of from the year before. Instead, this rematch became something rawer and more desperate, less about surprising the audience and more about two warriors absolutely emptying themselves for one final shot at history. Michaels fought like a man who genuinely believed this was his last chance at anything that mattered. He threw himself into every exchange with a recklessness that bordered on self-destruction, landing bigger, riskier moves than even the year before. For long stretches, it genuinely felt like the streak might finally end, with the crowd rising and falling with every false finish. In the end, though, Undertaker found a way to survive once more, securing the win and pushing his record to 18-0. But unlike the celebration after most streak victories, this one felt hollow. Because of the stipulation both men had agreed to, the win meant Michaels' career was officially over. As Undertaker stood in the ring afterward, he reportedly removed his hat and gloves and placed them over Michaels' fallen body, a quiet, almost reverent tribute from one legend to another. The following night, WWE dedicated an entire broadcast to honoring Michaels' career, filled with tribute videos and heartfelt speeches from the performers who had shared the ring with him over the decades. Even Undertaker made an appearance, tipping his hat to Michaels one final time as a sign of mutual respect between two men who had just given everything they had to each other across 2 unforgettable nights. Looking back, what made this rivalry so powerful wasn't just the in-ring excellence, although there was plenty of that. It was the willingness of two aging legends to put their entire legacies on the line, not for a championship belt, but for a story, for the right to claim they had given wrestling fans something they would talk about forever. Years later, The Undertaker's streak would eventually fall to Brock Lesnar at WrestleMania 30, ending one of the longest-running and most carefully protected storylines in wrestling history. But even after that loss, when fans were asked to name his single greatest performance, the answer almost always pointed back to 2009 and the man who challenged him in white. Long before WrestleMania 25 ever happened, Undertaker and Michaels already shared history that most casual fans had forgotten about. Back in 1997, the two of them headlined the very first Hell in a Cell match ever held in WWE, a brutal, claustrophobic encounter that ended in chaos when a mysterious figure climbed to the top of the cell and crashed through it. That figure turned out to be Kane, making his debut and changing the course of Undertaker's career for years to come. It was a reminder that these two men had been crossing paths in defining moments for over a decade before their iconic WrestleMania showdown ever took place. Michaels' road to becoming Mr. WrestleMania started long before that, though. He first broke into the business as part of a tag team called the Rockers, alongside Marty Jannetty, a flashy, high-flying duo that built a loyal following in the late 1980s. The partnership ended violently on television when Michaels threw Jannetty through a barbershop window, a moment that instantly transformed Michaels from a likable tag team performer into one of the most compelling singles villains of his era. From there, Michaels built his legend one classic match at a time, At WrestleMania 10, he and Razor Ramon battled in the first-ever televised ladder match at the event, a violent, innovative brawl that redefined what a WrestleMania match could look like. It became an instant template that wrestlers would try to recreate for decades, and it cemented Michaels as a performer, willing to risk his body for the sake of an unforgettable story. 2 years later, Michaels delivered one of the most important performances of his career at WrestleMania 12, battling Bret Hart in a 60-minute Iron Man match for the WWF Championship. The match went the full hour scoreless, eventually requiring sudden death overtime before Michaels finally won his first world title. It was the moment that elevated him from a great in-ring performer into the company's top star, a true changing of the guard moment for the entire promotion, but Michaels' career nearly ended just as his legend was peaking. By 1998, years of brutal bumps had wrecked his back, and after dropping the title at WrestleMania 14, he stepped away from full-time competition entirely, unsure if he would ever wrestle again. For nearly 4 years, the man known as Mr. WrestleMania watched the event he helped define from the sidelines, a forced retirement that could have easily become permanent. Against the odds, Michaels returned to the ring in 2002, slowly working his way back into world title contention and proving that his in-ring brilliance hadn't disappeared with time. By the mid-2000s, he had reinvented himself once again, not as a reckless daredevil but as a wiser, more disciplined veteran who somehow kept producing 5-star matches well into his 40s, exactly the kind of resume that made the idea of him chasing the streak in 2009 feel like a genuinely believable threat. Undertaker's own journey to that 2009 showdown was just as layered. Throughout the 1990s, he constantly reinvented his presentation to stay relevant, first as a supernatural mortician-like figure, then later as the leader of a dark cult-like faction known as the Ministry of Darkness, complete with sacrificial rituals and unsettling imagery that pushed the boundaries of what WWE storytelling looked like at the time. In 2000, he stripped all of that away and reintroduced himself as the American badass, a tattooed, motorcycle-riding biker character that felt almost unrecognizable compared to his original gimmick. It was a massive risk for a performer whose entire career had been built on mystique, but it worked, keeping him relevant through an era dominated by younger stars like The Rock and Stone Cold Steve Austin. By 2004, Undertaker returned once more to his original supernatural Deadman persona, a version of the character he would keep, with only minor tweaks, for the rest of his career. It was during this final evolution that the streak truly became the centerpiece of his entire identity, with each passing WrestleMania adding another chapter to a mythology that fans increasingly believed might never be broken. Throughout this stretch, Undertaker also became known for his real-life leadership backstage, frequently described by other wrestlers as the locker room's quiet authority figure, someone who held performers accountable, protected the business's traditions, and made sure newer talent understood what it meant to respect the industry. That reputation only added weight to the idea that beating him at WrestleMania wasn't just about ending a streak. It was about earning respect from a man very few people ever truly outworked. After their 2 unforgettable WrestleMania battles, the bond between Michaels and Undertaker only grew stronger behind the scenes. Michaels transitioned into a backstage producer role, eventually helping shape WWE's developmental brand, NXT, while Undertaker continued wrestling sparingly, choosing his spots carefully as his body allowed fewer and fewer matches each year. In 2018, Michaels stepped back into the ring one final time, teaming with Triple H as D-Generation X to face Undertaker and Kane as the Brothers of Destruction at the Crown Jewel event. It wasn't remembered as a classic, and reviews were largely unkind, but symbolically it closed a loop. The two icons who had defined each other's WrestleMania legacies sharing the ring together one last time before fully stepping away from active competition. Undertaker's farewell came gradually rather than all at once. After his emotional Hell in a Cell loss to Roman Reigns at WrestleMania 33 in 2017, he removed his hat, his gloves, and his long coat, laid them in the center of the ring, and walked away in a moment widely interpreted as a retirement. Yet the story wasn't quite finished. He returned for select matches over the next few years, including a cinematic Boneyard match against AJ Styles at WrestleMania 36, before finally delivering his true on-screen farewell later that year. Both men eventually received the recognition their careers demanded. Michaels was inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame in 2011 as an individual performer, and again in 2019 as part of D-Generation X. Undertaker followed in 2022, receiving one of the most emotional inductions in Hall of Fame history, with the ceremony built almost entirely around honoring the mystique he had protected for over 3 decades. Even years later, the two men continued showing up for each other in WWE storylines, appearing together to announce Hall of Fame inductees and reflect on their shared history. Their rivalry had long since transformed into something closer to brotherhood. Two performers who had pushed each other to create something neither could have built alone, and who never stopped publicly crediting one another for the legacy that came out of it.